All right, everybody, this is PF Rebuttal Strategies. So my first question to all of you is, when does planning rebuttal strategies start?
After the second team gives their confession.
That's when you should start figuring out how you're going to do the strategy you planned, but when does planning start? Anybody? Sorta, yeah. So planning starts for your rebuttal strategy right before your debate. So the most important thing to do, which is something that our varsity lab already knows, but it starts before the debate even begins. If you know what your opponent's going to say, or you know why they're going to say it, or you know regular generic arguments that happen again on the side that you're arguing against, you should set your case up strategically with framework or contentions that directly clash to other people's contentions in order to be able to have the best possible strategy for the rebuttal. The other thing is you want to know or have just kind of like a brief idea of what your final focus is going to be before the debate even starts. You kind of want to know what you want to go for and how you're going to set that up throughout the whole entire debate with all your other speeches. You also want to have different complementary or framework options. Some of you might not know what framework is yet. I'm sure your labs will go over that eventually. But it's basically how you're able to frame out your opponent's impact / offensive arguments in a way that is most strategic or advantageous for you to make it so that your advantages or your contentions outweigh theirs, which is something that's really important. Now, what's next after this? Does anybody know? Before the debate even starts, let's just say the debate started, what's next? We've done our first two constructive speeches. What's up? You raise your hand? Do you know what happens next? After the first speech happens, after the cross-X, next, it's the next constructive speech, what should happen? Okay, that's fine. So there are a couple answers to this. It was kind of an unfair question. Second constructive speech. Now, there are two different ways that you should be doing this based on your speaker positions that you flip for before round. So let's talk about the first speaker first. You want to sandbag the second speaker. Now, does anybody know what the term sandbag means? So, yeah, what's up? Yeah, exactly. So you want to put as many arguments as you possibly can on their case. The reason for this is because you don't have to refute any arguments against your own case already, which means you have a full 4 minutes to attack every single one of their arguments thoroughly and very, you could say, aggressively. I think personally that you should have one defensive argument for each argument they have. Do you all know what defense and offense is? Yeah? Okay, cool. So you should have one defensive argument, and the rest of it should be offense. You should be saying why the other team's case does something that is bad, and why your case is going to make it so that does not happen. That are offensive arguments which are harder to answer than defensive arguments are, which is why you want to put as many offensive arguments as you possibly can, so that the second speaker has the hardest or has a very hard time answering all of those arguments, while also having to apply their own offense to the opponent's case. So why do you want to do this? Why do you want to put, well, actually, I just already answered that question. I'm sorry. So you want to answer every part of their case. This is the only speech, the only opportunity that you will ever get throughout the whole entire debate to answer their whole entire case without ever having to respond to any defensive arguments to begin with, which is a big advantage if you can do it effectively. Now let's talk about the second speaker. So this is basically when planning strategic concessions already start. Do you all know what that means? Does anybody know what it means to have strategic concessions? David? Exactly. So what you want to do is start giving up arguments that might not be something that you want to go for. So this is kind of where the planning before the debate already comes into effect, which is that you kind of already know what you want your final focus to be, which means that you can strategically place arguments in ways that make it so that they can think that you're going for that argument, but you actually spend much more time on a different argument to make, and that's to be able to set it up as the argument you want to go for in your final focus. So you should use your own case as much as possible. Why is this? Why is this the case? Anybody other than David?
Well, you have like more evidence.
You have your own evidence, right? It's something you should know more than your opponent, and it's already built-in offense. So in a world where the first speaker does a perfect job of sandbagging your second speech, you have to remember that you have built-in offense. You have your case. It says that things that your side does are good, and you can use that against the arguments that they've already made instead of making new arguments, which can be more advantageous in the world where you have a lay judge in the back who doesn't really understand all the new arguments that are coming into place or technical ways of debating and flowing, and allows you to kind of just center on a single point and make it so it's very easy to convey your argument, and it's very easy for them to understand it. And even with a technical judge, they'll really understand that you're using the arguments that you already have to kind of place yourself in a better position for future speeches. They'll know what you're trying to do, and they will like that you're trying to do it. It is good to use your own case because it's the best way of applying offense in any speech. And remember in your second speech, offense before defense. Why do we want offense before defense?
It builds up your case.
Sure.
And defense is useful for, keeping the opponent's case, in check. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was good. He's right. So the reason that you want offense before defense is because first of all, it's harder to answer offense. So the summary speech is going to have a harder job of being able of having to deal with all the offense that you've put on their case. And also, while defensive arguments are good, it's better to just be able to say that we have these impacts and be able to do that impact analysis to begin with, which is like easier for a judge to kind of be able to understand as well if you're already setting up impact analysis before you've even made it to summary speeches. So constructive speech happens and the crossfires happened. We're on to the summary speech. Now, summary speech is easily the hardest debate in PF, or hardest speech in PF debate. Why is this? Anybody other than David?
Because you just said we've already talked about a little bit, and you just summarized why, like, the main points of the debate and, like, the points of, like, why the opponent is wrong, and, like, kind of like an overview of why you should vote for that.
That's partly right. Yeah, Eric? Yeah. So you basically have to answer every argument that was made in the other constructive speeches. Now, that's a bit of hyperbole because you don't actually have to do that. You have to learn how to make debates more narrow. Do you all understand what it means to make debates more narrow? Exactly. So the reason speech times are shorter going throughout the debate is because debates are getting smaller. It's important for debates to get smaller because it's important to have a reason you are right. You don't need a multitude of reasons. You need one reason, and you need to prove why that reason is more important than your opponent's. So you need to make debates smaller. Think of it like a funnel. Eventually, there are certain arguments that you're not going to go for and that you don't need. And in a 2-minute period of time, it is literally impossible to answer 8 minutes of argumentation that have happened in the constructive speeches. It is just impossible. Don't try to do it. You need to make strategic concessions like we talked about before to be able to set up the alley-oop. The summary speech is the alley-oop of PF debate. Be like Dwayne Wade and LeBron James, and be the Dwayne Wade coming across with LeBron James dunking in the back for your final focus, okay? Do not be like Lonzo Ball and Lance Stevenson, who failed miserably at the alley-oop. So there's strategy to each sides of the summary speech. So let's talk about the first speaker first, because you go first. You should extend defense on your opponent's case first. The reason for that, and this is the only time that you should ever do that, to be very clear. The only time that you should ever extend defense on your opponent's or on your case first is sorry, that shouldn't be your opponent's case. That should be your case. But this is the only time that you should do that first. Why is this? David? Right. So the reason for this is because you want to go for offense. You should spend maybe 30 seconds going for the defense that you want to extend, trying to predict what your opponent is going to go for in their final focus, and then extend your offense. Because like I've said before, the offense is far harder to answer for the second speaker or for the next speech than defense is. So we're actually gonna see what this looks like. I have an example debate after this slide. But next you want to extend the offense that you go for. Make sure that you use offense that creates embedded clash. Does anybody know what embedded clash means? Sorta. So, yeah, what's up? Yeah.
To create tension by argument or a debate or using this tension.
So that is what clash is the tension between arguments basically. But the embedded clash goes all the way back before the debate again, where we talked about setting up your final focus before the debate even starts. Your embedded clash should come from the case that you have already set up to answer their case to begin with. So you should already have the embedded clash. Those should be the offensive arguments that you're going for because they best answer your opponent's arguments to begin with. All right. So this puts the second speaker in a bit of a bind, but we're going to talk about what the second speaker should do. So this is easily the hardest of the two summaries. The reason for that is because instead of having to answer 4 minutes of argumentation, you have to answer 6 minutes of argumentation that have happened throughout the debate, which is a lot more difficult. In this speech, efficiency is the most important thing. You want to say as much as possible in the least amount of words as possible and in the most, coherent way for your judge to be able to kind of understand what you're trying to do. Condensing is key in this speech. You have to be able to pick and choose the arguments that you want to go for, or else the arguments that or else you're just not going to have a strategy going into your final focus. You want to have arguments that are complementary to each other to be able to kind of set that alley-oop up for your final focus, because this speech can either go terrible or it can go fantastic. So it just you really have to be efficient when you do this speech. When in doubt, go for offense. Like I've said before, and I'll say it a million more times, offense is the most important thing to go for because it makes it much easier for the final focus to have something to say that is good, that sets your final focus up to be able to have impact analysis that is effective and is persuasive in the judge's eyes, because there is a time skew when it comes to this speech. Your best defense is good offense. If they can't answer all your offense, then there's going to be something that you win in the debate. If you can win one argument in the debate, you just have to prove that that is more important than every other argument, which can be easy to do if you have a conceded point. Also, in this speech, if you have a framework that is advantageous to your offensive advantages, then you should go for that framework. Because if you can win your framework, it's easily the best defense, because it proves that all of their offense is no longer important in the debate. So I'm going to set up an example here for you. Let's say that they have just not answered your human rights contention, and you have a value to life framework, and they have a bunch of existential impacts, but just have not grappled very well with your framework, which is value to life. Your summary speech should be going for that their case does not matter, because a value to life analysis is the only way that you can ethically adjudicate the debate, which means in the final focus, all you have to go for as more important is your humanitarian rights advantage or contention, and just say that human rights are important. The con or the pro changes that, and the other side makes it worse. You should win the debate. Even if they have all these existential impacts, you can still win that debate if you win your framework is more important, which is easily the best defense in the round. And you should set up your impact calculus now, kind of like I said before. Have y'all's labs talked about impact calc yet? I know my lab has not. So this, you'll know what that means later. It's a way of weighing impacts through probability, time frame, and magnitude, and kind of being able to do analysis on why your impacts come first, or are the most probable or have the largest magnitude, and why that's important. So here's an example of a good summary speech that we are going to look at. My lab has already seen this, but I think this is probably the best summary speech that's happened in all of PF debate for a long time. So we're gonna watch it, because this is the hardest speech in debate, no question.
What's the resolution?
So the resolution, they're talking about voting laws, election reform, but what this guy in this debate does is something we already talked about in the previous slide. So I want you, after this speech is over, to tell me what this guy does that you're supposed to do in your first summary speech. Why is there no volume? Okay, there's no volume, which is a problem. Oh, here we go. Okay, that should change it.
serious overview, and also the most likely implementation of like sort of system without ever responding to any math events during rebuttal. The first one is that it's a direct national popular vote. Not only is this not direct to the electors of the intermediate, but it's not a popular vote because the election is being decided by a few number of people, not the actual populace. Their interpretation is not resolutional. Additionally, their evidence is talking about the 12th Amendment, which exists within the context of the Electoral College. They have no link here. Their evidence in cases even says the word electors, which are obviously going to be written in the Electoral College. But additionally, the impact card comes from Downey, which is the Democrats will fill the House until 2030. But this is from October before the election. Out of the bill charge 3 days ago, in most cases, it says the Democrats are going to win by 9 points a unit, and we started they having 10 times. Now go to our case. Here's where we begin on our second edition. The first one makes sense when you alternately have to go to specific counties. The problem is they never through a change in policy by campaigning in specific counties. Overall, going around still moving the party down and facing another 5% whether that's where the policy view comes from. Then there is diversifying the stats over the laws and more preferable on time frame with Marlon Brownson at 2015. This one seems diversifying incredibly slowly over the past 2 decades. For our drivers that we to compare it to the electoral college and popular vote they never are. Then there is this one that says like PR news wire says like that states that swing states are like helping student minorities. The problem is that the evidence is ballistic. Rapidly remember judges was the fourth while some swing states are minorities on balance minorities are by swing states. Additionally, that battleground states are lawful. Obviously, Trump's history has to point out Trump's traditionally made silver says that voting bloc is most overrepresented in swing states is Trump's voting bloc of white non-college educated voters. On our second one, you send for loan keys because their responses are not all responsive. The first thing they say is that there's going to be more public control speaks with more national voter IDs. The new Article 2012 says this is literally not going to happen. There's no reason there would be national voter IDs. And they say that the problem here is that the voter IDs are going to be more impactful under the electoral college than most of the data 12 swing states have. They say that there are no ID, but we have to be seriously for us. It's going to swing out from 0% that it does swing out from the popular vote. They say that there's going to be an increase in consent from the popular vote. Obviously, intent to dismiss that below shows the 8 of 12 swing states have these voting restrictions and never show that there's an increase in swing out from the popular vote.
All right. What did he do that we talked about in this last presentation? What did he do well? What's up? You.
We started with defense and we talked about how like their evidence, like some of it was like older than their evidence. Another one like you mentioned electors, even though like if the I guess the resolution would be electors.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So what he did there, he spent maybe 30 seconds of defense at the very top of the speech on their case. And then he went straight to his case and extended all of his, or not all of his offense, but the pieces of offense that he wanted, right? So what that does to the second speech is, first of all, they have to answer all this defense on their case. But second, they have to, while answering that defense, extend their offense in an effective way while also answering all the offense that the other team has extended on their case and trying to extend some sort of defensive argument against that. But all of that in that first speech, all of the defense that they had already put on his case was answered through embedded clash that happened on his case to make it so that he could effectively extend offense while also answering all the defense at the exact same time. That's probably like a perfect setup to a final focus speech that you could possibly do. That's kind of the format that you want to emulate when it comes to your summary speeches. All right. All right, so let's talk about the final focus. Format for the final focus is pretty universal. There's kind of like a format of things you should do. So it doesn't really matter what speaker you are in the context of the final focus, because you should be going for select pieces of offense that you've already decided to go for before the debate. And you should start with a 30-second to 45-second overview. Something that's very important in the final focus is you want to sound pretty. If y'all remember the demo debate that happened, me and Tyler both went with more affect than we actually went with technical skill debating in the final focus. The reason for that is because it's the last speech. You want to make the judge want to vote for you while also winning the debate on a technical level. So you want to sound good while also making arguments that most effectively clash with your opponent's arguments, and prove that your side is doing something better than the other side. So that overview can be a couple different things. It can be an analysis of kind of like how the judge should weigh the round. So a framework analysis of, like we kind of talked about before, you should say something like, Judge, at the end of this debate, the only type of analysis that you can use is a value to life framework because it's the best way of blank, blank, blank warrant, however you want to put it. But you should start with something that kind of affectively pulls the judge in while also making arguments that are very effective when it comes to debating. You should you also should kind of like outline how the round has gone. So even if you don't do kind of a framework analysis at the top, you should be like, all right, so this is kind of how this debate boils down. The pro side does this, the con side does this. There are specific reasons that you want to prefer each side, and then you go into your voters. You should have 2 to 3 voters that should take a minute 30, a minute 45 to get through. The reason, or the way that this should be developed is, I personally believe that the first speech should have 3 voters with 2 offensive arguments and 1 defensive argument. I'm going to say the same thing I've said throughout this whole entire presentation. The reason for that is because the other final focus will have a harder time responding to more offensive arguments than they will have responding to defensive arguments. The defensive argument that, yeah, what's up? What? Yeah, go for it. The defensive argument that you should go for is the argument that you think you're most effectively winning as defense and most effectively answers the argument that you think they are going to go for in their final focus. So as the second final focus happens, you do have to respond to your opponent's final focus. But you can do this in a lot of different ways. I suggest using the embedded clash that you have had set up since the beginning of the debate in order to win this. I think that you should have 1 offensive argument and 1 defensive argument. That being, the offensive argument should be the argument you think you are most winning that says that you do something good. And you should have very, very thorough impact calculus as to why that outweighs anything your opponent has said. While you're doing that impact analysis, you can immediately tie your defensive voter in at the bottom by saying whatever it is, why that means that your first voter outweighs all of their impacts, and why the judge should vote for you at the end of this debate. This doesn't need to be as technical as other speeches have to be. This should be more affectively pleasing, like I said before, but it should be more of kind of a very, very condensed version of what you want the debate to be at the end. It should be close to what you wanted your final focus to be when we started the debate beforehand, and it should be what your summary speech has set up throughout the whole through the last 2 speeches. But the most important thing at the end of the debate every single time is, why do your impacts outweigh their impacts? You have to answer that question. If you don't answer that question, you leave the debate up to the judge to decide. You don't want to do that. You want the judge to know why your points are more important. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. Ways that your lab leader should be talking about, which is like framework, actually doing impact calculus, probability, magnitude, time frame, which is something we'll talk about in our lab. But at the end of the debate, the most important thing is saying why your impacts are more important than theirs. You have to win that in every debate, or else you're leaving the debate up to chance. So that was the presentation. Does anybody have any questions? All right, let's do like a little bit of a review. So, when do you start planning your rebuttal strategies? Your hand up was up first. Good. Why do you want to do that?
Because if you want to know, if you know what your opponent is doing,
Yep. And you want it set up embedded clocks, right? Awesome. So what happens in the second constructive? Let's say first speech. What's up? You.
just saying back to second speaker,
Exactly. You want to sandbag the second speaker. Why do you want to do that?
so you can get as much offense on him as possible.
Exactly. So what do you do as the second speaker? Yep. You want to start planning strategic concessions. You want to start setting up your summary speech.
Usually as much as possible.
Exactly. Use your case as much as possible. The embedded clash that you've set up beforehand should be what you're going for in your second speech. Exactly. All right. So after the second constructives, it's the first summary. What do you want to do first as the first summary?
Extend your defense.
Exactly. You want to extend the defense. Why do you want to do that?
So you can argue against what the other speakers have already said and to transition to your offensive argument.
Right. You want to make the second speech as hard as possible. So you want to transition to your offense as quickly as possible and try to kind of mitigate their impacts as much as you possibly can, right? So what do you do as the second speech? Second summary.
For your second summary, you should
Do you want me to get back to you? What's up?
Efficiencies the opponent out go for offense.
Yep. When in doubt, go for your offense. What is the metaphor for the summary speech? What are you doing for the final focus? Yep, that's right. It's the alley-oop. Be like LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. All right. So what do you want to do in the final focus? We just talked about it. So. Yeah. What? You do? You want to weigh the impacts? What do you want to start your speech with? Yeah. That's fine. What do you want your voters to be? You. Sorry, what's your name?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, Rhea.
Rhea.
Have 2 to 3 voters.
2 to 3 voters. What do you want those voters to be?
1 to 2 offensive, 1 to defensive.
Exactly. And what's the most important part of the final focus speech? David? Impact calculus is the second most important part. But what was at the top? What's the most important part? Exactly. Affectively being pleasing. Sound pretty. Make your judge want to vote for you. If your judge wants to vote for you because you sound better, it's going to make it that much easier for them to vote for you at the end of the debate. Final focus and PF debate in general is a lot about sounding pretty and sounding better than your opponent, as well as trying to win on a technical level. It's special in that way when it comes to different forms of debate. All right. So are there any other questions that y'all have about how you set up rebuttals, strategy in general? Yeah, what's up?
Can you go back to the first slide?
Yeah. All right. Well, in that case, y'all can start your research time.